just saying your name in front of a camera is the most awkward thing in the world.
Matt. Matt.
GJ.
Jacob.
Ryan.
No! Hey, no.
Pat.
Andrew.
Droopy.
Hey, my name's Chuck.
Joe.
Angela.
Mark.
Sunil.
Sean.
Mark.
Chrissy.
Michelle. Nikki. Aaron.
Lisa.
Mandy.
Brian.
Scott.
Kim. Mary. Stephanie. April.
Brian.
Hey Paradox, good morning. My name is Greg. This morning we wanted to share with you all of our names because we believe that our God knows each one of us personally. He cares about us, He knows our name, and we here at Paradox would love to get to know you too. So there's a couple ways you can do that. First, you can text the number at the bottom of your screens. That helps us get connected with you so you're in our system. We can reach out to you on a regular basis to keep you in the loop as to what's going on here at Paradox. The second thing you can do is grab one of the cards on the seat in front of you. There's a connection card and a volunteer card. You can fill that out and drop it in the bucket as it passes you by later in the service. This is a great way for us to connect with you outside of a Sunday morning. We have an important message for you. Next week on Memorial Weekend, we're going to have one service at 11 a.m. So do not show up at 9 or you will be here by yourself. Paradox, please welcome to the stage our lead pastor, Craig McGlasson.
Mornings. There it is. Good morning, 9 o'clock. My faithful 9 o'clock. So this morning, I want to start off first by just, again, even though she's not here yet, acknowledging and thanking Nicole for having taken the stage last week. I don't know if you were here last week when Nicole got up and spoke and shared with us on Mother's Day, but I know I have a biased opinion, given that it was my wife, but I will tell you that I sure hope she does it again and that we get to see her on the stage more often here at Paradox. So this morning, we're going to be kicking off a new series, and I have a couple things I wanted to say about it before we kind of dive into it to set it up. But this is you know what? Hey, let's just do this. I'm going to do an audible here. You're good. I appreciate you. Thank you, Droopy. So I just want to have a moment. You're like, what is going on? I just want to have a moment right now that doesn't feel like we're trying to create something. Because I've been trying to, for the last couple of days, figure out what to say, if anything to say, in light of some of the things that have been going on in our world this last week. And most of you probably know, if you're at any regular attendance here at Paradox, I am an avid gun owner, hunter, and yet I am getting tired of having to figure out so often throughout the year if and what to say about more senseless tragedy coming into a Sunday morning like this with you. And there's this loud debate right now that all of us are aware of about what to do, and there's no shortage of opinions. And those opinions have created quite the divide among families and friends, even churches. And there's also a loud voice that says to that debate, we don't want your thoughts and prayers anymore. We want reform. And so I've watched a lot of this, and I've listened to a lot of this, and I have, for a long time, just kept my mouth shut in some of my own friendships and relationships, and even if you've been here, you know from this stage. And this is just one of those weeks where I felt like I just don't want to keep my mouth shut on it anymore. I've had my conversations, I've had my thoughts, but I've also tried to make sure that this stage is about this. It is about Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone. This isn't a platform for me. It's not a platform for us, for issues that we or I just want to tote or get an opinion on or tell you my opinion on. But there comes to be moments where it really, for me, isn't about opinion anymore. It is about my belief of the Scriptures and the ever-changing work that God can do in our lives. And I guess here's what I just wanted to contribute, because I do want to pray for a moment. I want to pray for Texas. I want to pray for the school. I want to pray for these kids, all of our kids. I want to pray for my own. I got a 15-year-old that once again, I had to listen to him and his 15-year-old ninth grade friend go, this is stupid. We don't ever want to go to school again, and have to wrestle with that as ninth graders. And so I want to pray. I want to pray for all that for a moment and ask you even, give you kind of a moment in your own seat to pray. Many of you are praying people. Give you a moment to do that. And maybe you're not, and that's fine. Let us maybe carry that prayer for a minute. Maybe you just take a moment of silence. But here's what I believe. Listen, I'm all for, on the one side, I'm all for like reform that makes sense and that it's smart. And yet here's where I land strong on this issue. No matter what we reform, it changes nothing if this doesn't change. Do you agree with that? If the human heart doesn't change, you can take whatever you want out of people's hands, and they will then use their hands to do horrific things to one another. I'm all for reform that makes sense. I'm all for change. I'm all for it, okay? But I just want to make sure that we all realize and agree that no change outside of the human heart changes anything. And the only thing that changes the human heart is Jesus Christ. And so when I say I'm praying for that, it's not because I'm trying to be idle. It's not because I don't want action. It's because I believe that the greatest thing that changes anything will be Jesus. He will lead our politicians to make wise choices. He will lead our churches to know how to respond. He will lead broken, hurting children to know how to not hurt other children. Like nothing changes the human heart but Jesus Christ alone. That's why, quite frankly, I'm not in politics. That's why I'm not a police officer. Obviously, those are necessary jobs. Those are necessary roles. Frankly, if I wasn't a pastor, I probably would be a cop. I've taken many a personality profile that says I should be. That's probably where I'd be if I wasn't here. The reason I'm here is not because those are unimportant jobs, but because in the end, they cannot do what Jesus does, which is change the human heart. That's why I'm in this business. And when I say I'm offering prayers for moments like this, it's because I believe that the one thing that ultimately can change everything from whatever reform we need to hurting people that need to change is Jesus and the work he does in our hearts. So I don't know about you, but I'm sure that you're a lot like me. I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of seeing what happens. And I just pray not just for the families there, but I pray that God would even give voice and wisdom to those of us that say that we hold within our hands, our hearts, and our minds the knowledge of the risen King of creation, that we would have wisdom and courage to know how to move aggressively into our world with that truth and stop keeping it to ourselves. Do you realize this is what happens when the world forsakes Christ? This is what happens when we keep him to ourselves. This is what happens when we believe Jesus belongs only in the church on Sunday morning as the world goes awry. So may we as men and women of Jesus Christ be bold men and women of Jesus Christ. I haven't even started preaching yet. You ready for this? It's going to be a good morning. There's just a lot of things our world needs us to do more than just sit here on a Sunday morning and be glad we have a good church. Our world needs us in the world, being not of the world, but in it, and bringing Jesus to it. So can we just take a minute and just pray? And I'm going to give you a moment in silence. Maybe you want to pray with whoever's next to you. Maybe you just want to pray silently to yourself. I'm going to give us a minute of silence. I'm going to come in and I'm going to pray for us all and for the situation, and then try and lead us into where I think God wants us to go in his scriptures today. Father in heaven, this is just one of those weeks where I just feel overwhelmed. I'll be honest with you, God. I feel overwhelmed with everything going on in our world, from continued and constant and even just fresh this week chaos in the Middle East to threats constantly of war and whether or not one country to another can get along, who's going to dismantle their nukes and who's not going to, school shootings, and even nature itself being in upheaval, mountains erupting. And Father, this is just one of those weeks where I'm reminded of the scripture's words that even creation is groaning for the day that you will return and set all things right. And Father, in that groan, would you hear our prayers this morning? Would you hear our prayers that are desperate for your wisdom, and they're desperate for your leading, that we would know how to respond to moments where such senseless tragedy happens, and that we wouldn't be people that first go to our opinions or our politics or our policies, but we would go to our King. We would kneel before you, and we would ask for your move in this world and for your move in our own hearts, that we would be mindful of the fact that what our world is in most desperate need of is that the human heart would change, and that the only thing that does that is the resurrected Jesus Christ. And I pray, God, that we would start to experience a resurrection power like maybe we never have before. Your church has often prayed for things like revival. And I don't know that we always know exactly what we're asking for when we say things like that, or that we're always even saying the same thing. But I think at the heart of it, what we're asking for when we pray things like that is that your Holy Spirit would sweep through our country and our world in a way only like we have read about in history, that men and women in a supernatural way would just come face to face with you and begin to yield their lives to you, that the tide of all creation could begin to turn in an instant because of the power of your Spirit. And so that's my prayer, God. And I also know that as I read your scriptures, we see the end of the story is the remaking of everything that is. And there's just a reality to the fact that Scripture tells us moving towards that day, things will become more perverted and destructive and horrific. And so sometimes it's confusing even knowing that that's the path humanity's on, how to pray that you would change that tide, knowing that ultimately we are going to a place of recreation, but in the process, God, and in the path towards that recreation that you have in store for us, may your church be the church in this world that is in the world and not just in the buildings. Would we be men and women that realize that this is not about religion, it is about carrying the message of Jesus Christ, his hope, his life, his death, his resurrection, and his again to come return to all humanity, every nation, every tongue, every tribe, every man, woman, and child that would listen, would we realize it is why we are here. That we would be you to this world. God of creation, would you, I pray, enter so powerfully and presently into the lives and into the chaos of all the people affected by the recent shooting. I don't even know exactly what to ask you to do, other than just I'm convinced in the moments of my own experience of tragedy that I just needed the weighty, dripping presence of Jesus to be felt all over me. And so I pray that for these people and these families. Do what only you can do, and provide what only you can provide. And to all of us, give wisdom that only you can give to know what to do and how to respond. Be present to us all this morning, I pray, God. And even, I don't know, maybe some of us even are sitting here feeling like, man, I come to church to kind of escape for a minute, and here I walked into a moment of a lot of weight. Maybe we need to feel that, God, because we cannot be a people, a men and a women who see the church as an escape from the world. But we are the men and women sent by you into the chaos of this world. That's why I think Jesus was often called a man of many sorrows. He bore the weight and the pain and the suffering of those around him. Though he knew the glory that was available should they turn their lives to him, he bore that weight because he knew not just the suffering of the people around him, but he knew more than anything else that there was hope available to them if they would just turn to him. And so I pray that maybe we would be men and women that know how to carry that weight as well, carrying around the suffering of Christ in our bodies because we know the hope that Jesus can provide. Speak to us this morning, and do, I pray, lift us up. But lift us up in a way that makes us missional to the world around us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So this morning I'm going to ask a favor of you as well as I kind of take us forward a little bit. I cannot seem to catch a break with my health lately. A couple weeks ago got over a nasty food poisoning, and then this last week I got hit with a ridiculous strep throat. So I actually called Mike Nank, one of our other pastors, on Friday, and I told him, I'm like, listen, if you can, I need you to be on standby because at this moment I have no voice. So on Sunday, if you could be ready to go. So I gave him my notes. He's like, I've read them through. I think I'm ready. So I'm only warning you because a couple of things I predict are going to happen. Throughout this service, I'm going to have a couple of moments where my voice sounds like I'm going through puberty again. Just bear with me. And I may drink a lot and may even have to turn for a moment, turn off the mic, and take a hefty cough. Second thing that's going to happen is you're probably going to get the best I have to offer because second service is going to walk in, and I just may have to call on Mike still and have him come preach. So if you're a praying person, I would, in all sincerity, I'd appreciate your prayers that my voice can hold out for the rest of the morning. Here's what else I'd love to have you do to help me get going this morning. I want to play a little bit of spiritual volleyball to kind of get the day going. So a little bit of group participation. Yay, says some of you, right? So here's how you're going to do that. A little bit of spiritual volleyball. I want you to help me kind of bump the morning up in theme and content. I'm going to come in behind you, and I'm going to try and set it. And then we're going to trust that the Spirit of God will be present this morning, and He'll spike it into some truth and change in our lives. So you go, well, how in the world are we going to bump the content? Here's how you're going to do it. I just want you to stand to your feet for one quick moment. I know you've already been up. Stand up again. And I want you to look to nothing less than 3 people around you, and I want you to ask one simple question. 3 people, 1 question, even if you already know the answer. What's your name? That's it. Ready? Go. Mike. Bill. One of the more famous moments of introduction in the Bible is found in a book called Acts. It's in the 9th chapter, and it's with a man named Saul, who eventually became Paul. And this is how that introduction went. Verse 1 of chapter 9, meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and he asked for letters to the synagogue in Damascus so that if he found any there who belonged to the Way, this is the early name of Christianity. I don't know if some of you know that. We weren't originally called Christians. We were called the Way movement, because Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so everybody began to follow him. Nobody knew what to call those people, so they just called them the Way. So Saul's going there after this group that's gathered called the Way, and any who belonged to them, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoner to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him, and he fell to the ground. And he heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you? Saul, what's your name? What's your name? Saul asked. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what to do. God, would you just give tremendous wisdom and insight into your scriptures this morning? Bring them alive. Use me however you choose to do that in the process. Amen. So here's a question I have for you. I'm wondering how many of you can think of a time in your life where you wanted to get to know somebody that just felt a little bit too out of touch, like a little too out of reach. So like maybe it was somebody you wanted to get to know and they were just a little too popular. Maybe you can think of that like back in high school, or maybe they're a little too famous. Maybe they're just a little too successful. Maybe they're a little too attractive. Like whatever it is, can you think of a time where you've been in your life where you wanted to get to know somebody, but all you got was kind of know them from a distance? Like maybe you knew their name, but they didn't know your name. Matter of fact, they probably didn't even know you were alive, and all you could get was like from a distance because they were too little too fill in the blank, whatever it is. So for me, one of those like stories that I have of a time like that, probably the best one, was 1994 when I walked into my very first college class. 1994, I walked into English 101. Did you have this class with me? Mrs. Wagner, Professor Wagner, English 101, first day, first class. I come walking in. I walk right through the door. First thing I see was this beautiful angel with long blonde hair sitting on the other side of the room, waving it around as if she had no idea what she was doing to the guys in the room. And I'm like, wow, I want to sit over there. 2 things immediately stopped me from going over there. Number 1 is that I realized should I get too close, I would instantly lose the ability to speak. Hi, I'm no Casanova. And number 2 would have stopped me is the wall of guys that surrounded this girl like security. It was like, okay, I'm not going. So I go to the other side of the room and I sit down and I'm just thinking, how do I get to know that girl? So then the professor starts roll call and it dawns on me, well, I'm going to at least get to know her name. So she's over here and I'm doing the like look out of the corner of my eye thing, waiting to see which hand goes up to what name, and then I hear it. Nicole Hood, and her hand goes up. And so here's this angel on the other side of the room who has no idea I walked in and frankly probably doesn't even care, but her name is Nicole. And I'm thinking, I got to get to know Nicole. Somehow I got to get through that wall of guys to get to know Nicole. But I had no idea. So a couple weeks go on in school, and I just do not have the courage to approach her, do not have the courage to go talk to her. She's on the opposite end of the room. So then my professor solves the problem, which is brilliant. It was great. I didn't even have to do anything. We get assigned this paper that we have to write. And at one point through the process of the paper, the professor throws a curveball, and she says, here's what you're going to do. Before you turn the paper in, you're going to exchange it with students. And you're going to pick one other person, or I'm going to pick them for you. You're going to swap papers, and you're going to grade them, because I want to see if you're paying attention to the details you should. Then you're going to submit them. So guess who I got paired up with? Nicole. Right, I get paired up with Nicole. I'm like, yes. So Nicole and I get paired up. I get her paper. All honesty, I think I only read like a couple of moments of it so I could make it look like I read it so I could give her some feedback. I didn't care. I was just like, A, you get an A. All I could wait for was the day that we would come back next week, exchange papers, talk about it, talk about the paper and our future together. I was like, that's all I want to do. So we come back together next week. We sit across from each other. I go first. I hand her paper. I'm like, this was the best work I've ever seen. I mean, A, I didn't even hardly read it. I was just like, good. What'd you like about it? Everything. It was just great work. And so then I'm like, go ahead. And I'm thinking, because I give her an A, like instant rapport, right? Like I'm knight in shining armor. I'm thinking, like she's going to hand me my paper and go, let's talk about a wedding date. So she flips mine over, hands it to me. I grab it, look at it. E. She totally failed me on it. And then she says to me, honestly, this is the worst paper I've ever read. I think an elementary student could have done a better job. I'm like, I hate you now. I don't like you at all. So here I am in this moment. I finally know her name. She knows my name, like even more. And yet Nicole is not the name I want to call her. I'm just going to be honest with you. That's not what I want to call her in that moment. So this fall, Nicole and I will have been married for 22 years now. And the crazy thing is that for the last 22 years, I go all the way back to that first moment where I met, and that first encounter did not go anything like I hoped it would go or thought it would go to turn into 22 years of marriage. Every one of us have had a moment like that in life, where there is some encounter we've had that just did not go the way that we thought it should go or would go. And maybe for you, it was also a love interest, right? Maybe you're in the middle of one right now. You're in a moment like things are just not working out the way that I thought they would. Or maybe it was a job interview. Didn't go the way you thought. Or maybe the first couple weeks of a new job. Maybe a blind date. Maybe meeting parents at a kids event for a new sports team. Like, have you ever gone through that? Like, what the heck? That is a gauntlet of, like, we're going to weigh you, measure you, and tell you what you're worth at the end of it. Maybe you've never been through that. Every time we, like, join a new sports team, it's like, well, get prepared to be told and judged and sized up. Maybe you've just gone through that, and it was like, this did not go. We thought we'd blend in and be the new parents of the team. We're on the outside. Or maybe for some of you, maybe it was how you define your first encounter with God. Or maybe every encounter with God. Or maybe you would even go, don't even know if I've had an encounter with God. Because I think this weird thing happens sometimes when we think about having an encounter with a being like the God of creation. We tend to think that if you're going to have an encounter with God, that it probably should involve something either supernatural or something super obvious. That it's just like a super obvious, like, God type of moment. A moment that, frankly, we feel like should create the feels within us. You know what I mean? The feels are like, oh, I got the warm, like something's going on. So here's one of the cool things. I get to do a lot of weddings, and I don't, if you haven't noticed, I don't fit the typical, like, traditional mold of a pastor or even, like, what we're more familiar with in our community, which is Catholic. And so what happens a lot of times when I go do a wedding or even sometimes a funeral is that people will come up to me afterwards. And I love it because a lot of times it's guys. And they'll come up to me, and you can see it. Like, there's, like, a little water in their eyes, and they're like, man, I don't know what just happened, but I'm like feeling something. Like, and there's like this, and we think that that's what has to happen if we're going to have an encounter with God. Like, we have to have the feels and get the goosebumps and have these chills. And a lot of people even pick a church to go to based on that. I don't know if you've noticed this or if you've seen this, or maybe you've done it. Like, we have this tendency to decide whether or not we're going to go to a certain church as to whether or not we feel something. Does it give us the goosebumps? Does it give us the chills? Because for us, that kind of seems to validate the presence of God, an experience, an encounter with God. The thing is, I just don't think it always does. To be honest with you, I have done this. Like, I have not just believed in God. Like, I feel like I have known him. I relate to him. I have a relationship with him. I have walked with him for the better part of my 42 years of life. And I can tell you this, in almost every encounter I've ever had with him, they're not these tremendously supernatural moments. or always even these super obvious moments that I'm having an experience with God. Often it is God steps into the very ordinary, mundane moments of my life that could easily be missed if I'm not paying attention. I mean, for me, to be honest with you, you know Kelly Clarkson? She does that song, Piece by Piece. You ever heard that song she sings? It's about the broken relationship she had with her own father growing up. Like every time I listen to that song, that gives me the feels. That doesn't mean God's present in that moment or that Kelly Clarkson's God. But we have this tendency to think that an encounter with God, it's got to have these feelings. It's got to be something that goosebumps and chills. And I just don't think that's always the case. As a matter of fact, it's one of the reasons why I love that all throughout this book, there is this immense variety of examples of people encountering God. Not even just for the first time, but time and time again. But especially the first times, if you look at those, there's just this variety of experience. There's no one way that people experience God. Sometimes the experience is beautiful and peaceful, and sometimes it's disruptive. Sometimes the experience is very clear and obvious, and sometimes it's very abstract. Sometimes it's very face-to-face, and sometimes it's very indirect. Sometimes it's God entering into a situation and bringing calm, and sometimes the encounter is God entering into a calm situation and bringing disruption. I mean, take, for example, the story I read a moment ago about Saul. So Saul, if you know anything about his life, you probably know this, but Saul in his day and age was a religious guy who was at the top of the food chain of what he did. Like, he was a big deal. And Saul was convinced that this new movement called the Way was anti-God. And so he thought he was serving God by going after them and putting the boot on them and just squashing them. He's going to eradicate this movement because it's actually an anti-God movement until literally en route, they're gathered in this place called Damascus, and he realizes if I can get there, that's where the bulk of them are. If I can squash it there, I'll just kill this whole thing. En route to Damascus, God literally shows up, knocks him to the ground, blinds him, and then corrects him and says, wait a minute. I'm the one that you're persecuting. These people of the Way, they are following the real true God. And so Saul, who becomes Paul, goes on to become, in all seriousness, probably the single most important person in the entire New Testament of the Bible. Certainly the single most important person in the development of the early church, planting church after church in city after city, the single largest contributing author to the Bible. And yet here's what's interesting. For a guy who became so much in his walk with God, his very first encounter with God was basically a beatdown by God. But you look all throughout the Bible and you see, again, time and time again, people having encounters with God that just are, at best, sometimes very bizarre. You have a guy named Peter, who became one of the disciples of Jesus, so committed to Jesus that he ended up being crucified for his belief that Jesus was the resurrected Lord. And when they crucified him, he said, not right side up, I don't deserve to even die like he died, crucify me upside down. His first encounter, Jesus showed up at his work site, literally looked at him and said, leave your job, follow me into a new life now. Don't put in your 2 weeks. Don't go talk to your boss, just quit right now. And he did. He walks off the job site right then and there and begins to follow Jesus in an entirely new life that he had no idea at that moment what it would entail. In the Old Testament, there's a story of a little boy named Samuel. You know the story? God's first encounter with Samuel was in the middle of the night. Samuel's dead asleep. God wakes him up by calling his name in the dark. He has no idea what's going on or who's calling him. He runs to the room of a guy named Eli. He's like, did you call me? No, go back to bed. Several times over this happens, and he has no idea who's calling. How'd you like that to happen? The middle of the night, you're sleeping. Ryan. Like, would that freak anybody out? Like, what in the world? Like, that's how God encounters him. Or Moses. Most of you probably know Moses' story. Think of the encounter that God had with Moses. First encounter was what? Moses was out, again, at his job, tending to his sheep. And all of a sudden, he looks across, and there's a bush, and it's on fire, and he goes over there, but it's not burning up. It's completely consumed by flames, but nothing's being destroyed. And then he hears the voice, an audible voice. I talk to you a lot about hearing the voice of God. We hear his voice through his written word. We hear it through his spirit. So it's many times this internal thing that you just kind of hear in your head. It's just internal. But Moses actually got to hear the audible voice of God, every bit as audible as mine is to you right now. That was his first encounter with God. So you look throughout the scriptures and you see moments of encounter that are catastrophic, some that are intrusive, some that are confusing, some that are miraculous. There's no one way that people tend to encounter God throughout the scriptures. Sometimes God is encountered through a person's faith. And frankly, sometimes there are stories where God is encountered through the process of someone's doubt. There are times that God is encountered by a person because they're running after him. They're trying to find him. They're trying to have an encounter. And then there's other times where people encounter God because they're running the opposite direction. running away from him. Do you know that there are actually times, I've seen them myself, and probably some of you have as well, where people encounter God even in the process of hating him and wanting nothing to do with him? So there's all these variety of stories throughout the scriptures that show to us that an encounter with God can never be confined to one experience. Because when we have this idea that it's got to be either super obvious or supernatural, we take this idea of encountering God and we narrow it down to such a small window of experience that I think half the time we miss most of the ways that God may be trying to encounter us. Because the Bible is just full of too many examples that are so vastly different of what happens when men and women encounter God, whether for the first time, the 50th time, or the 500th time over. So the more you look at these stories, here's what's interesting, and here's what this series is really birthed out of. It's only a couple weeks long, but more and more as I look at these stories of people encountering God, for all the things that are different, there are a handful of things that seem to be similar and consistent almost every single time over. A couple of common denominators and fundamentals, if you will. And it's occurred to me recently, I think that it's important to look at these because much of what God tells us in here is not just to show us what he did back then, it is to show us what he still does here. Right? Like, in other words, the stories of what God used to do with people aren't just to tell us historically what he once did so we have knowledge about it. The stories of what God once did with people is to show us what he still does with people. So one of the stories I want to look at for a moment with you is probably for most of you, you'll know at least bits and pieces of it. Because, again, like Paul's story, it's one of the more famous or one of the more known kind of encounters with God. It's with a guy named Zacchaeus. And even if you don't know all of Zacchaeus' story, you probably know parts of it, especially if you grew up in the church. Right? You remember the song, Zacchaeus was a... Yeah, I just want to see you guys say wee little in church. So that's fine. Zacchaeus' story goes this way. Jesus... Wow. Learn to drink, Craig. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector, and he was wealthy. He wanted to see Jesus and who he was, but because he was short and could not see over the crowd, he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. And when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and saw him. Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. And so he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. And all the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. All right, stop there for a moment. So you got to realize that in this moment, Jesus, he's the hottest thing to happen for a while. Like he's the superstar. He is the celebrity of the hour. Nobody knows exactly what to make of him. He claims to be more than a man, and that's a little bit hard to believe for most people watching him. But he's doing things nobody can understand and nobody can explain. And so the crowds are building everywhere he goes. Everybody wants to see this guy. Everybody wants to hear him. And if he can do some of the things that have been rumored, then everybody wants a piece of that as well. So this crowd is just formed all around him, waiting to see him, to hear from him. And so in the moment that he's here in this crowd, he singles out one person and essentially ignores all the rest. Like I don't know if can you think of a time where you've been looked over or passed over? Nobody enjoys those moments. The only thing worse than a moment where you feel like you've been passed over is a moment you feel like you've been passed over for somebody that, let's just be honest, in your mind, you think you rated better than, right? So maybe it was at work, like somebody else got the promotion that you knew you were the better worker. You do a better job. You deserve the promotion. Maybe it's a relationship. Like she went for him. What? Like he's a jerk, or he went for her. Like I'm a way better pick. Like the only thing worse than getting passed over is passed over for somebody that you look at and go, wait, I'm better than that person. Like this is that moment. Jesus singles out of all the people there, he singles out one person. He singles out Zacchaeus. Nobody's happy about it. And some of you know the story of Zacchaeus and you know his backstory, and so you can probably figure out why nobody's happy. But for those of you that don't, humor me for a moment. So the reason nobody's happy is because of what Zacchaeus does. Not just because he is a tax collector. It's not like anybody loves the IRS. It's way more in this day and age than the IRS. Remember, this day and age, the superpower is who? Who rules everything? Rome. Rome is the superpower of the day. Virtually everything in existence in any society worth acknowledging is under the oppressive thumb and boot of Rome. They rule everything from end to end. Now, when you think about this is an unbelievable feat in an era where you don't have smart bombs and drones and planes and tanks. Like, how do you rule and maintain order over everything in an era like this where you don't have the technology that we have. You do it with two things, a massive army and a ruthless army. Rome was known to march into a town and just to be able to set things straight of who was going to be in charge off the bat. They would make examples of people and they would pull them out of their homes. They would slaughter them. They would crucify them. Rome literally became experts at crucifixion simply and purely because they did it so often. Any town that decided to rebuttal their rule, any town that decided to reject it, that even brought out more fury from Rome. It was not an uncommon scene to walk into a city of that day that Rome had taken over or retaken over that tried to break away from them and literally, picture this, see the streets lined with crosses with the dead, rotting bodies of men, women, and even kids. And you would have to walk by this as you got into the town as a reminder, Rome is in charge, and nobody else. How do you fund an army that big that can keep that much control over that much of the planet? A lot of taxes. You tax the people that you've overthrown. Zacchaeus was a Jew collecting taxes for the Romans from his own people. And he wasn't just a tax collector. If you caught it in the text, it says Zacchaeus was what kind of a tax collector? He was a chief tax collector, which means he was a tax collector over tax collectors. And one of the things that tax collectors had a reputation for doing, especially the more power and authority that they had, like Zacchaeus, was skimming off the top. So if you owe Rome $1, I'm going to take $1.25 and I'm going to give $1 to Rome and I'll put 25 in my pocket, and I very quickly become a very rich man. And if you have a problem with that, John, and you start to fight about that, I'm going to go to the local centurion and I'm going to tell him, you're giving me a problem. Guess what happens to you, John? They crucify you. So you learn very quickly to give me that extra 25 cents and just keep your mouth shut. Now, I just want you for a minute to put this in our own context. Let's imagine this next year, that North Korea and Japan come together and decide the United States is done, and they invade, and they take over. And let's imagine as they take over, they just annihilate city after city to just demonstrate their power, to demonstrate their authority. And they do. And they set up shop and they take over the White House and they are now in charge. And let's assume that there's some places that revolt. Warren ain't having it. Warren's like, go back to China. We're not doing it. But then they send in more troops and they just start wiping out person after person. And now when you drive down Mound, you literally have to drive down cross after cross after cross of dead, rotting body. People you knew, people you worshiped with, city politicians, famous faces. And then you have a neighbor named Keith. And Keith has realized that he can work with Rome. Because you know what? They're here anyways. Japanese aren't going anywhere. Koreans, whoever it is that invaded, they're not going anywhere. Somebody's going to make money off of it. Might as well be me. People are going to die anyways. And so Keith now starts knocking on your door. This guy you went to church with. This guy that was your friend. And he's demanding the $1.25 you owe Rome. $1 for them, 25 cents for you. How do you feel about Keith? Anybody going to call him Keith? Probably going to call him a lot of names, but probably not going to call him Keith. That's Zacchaeus. This is Zacchaeus, and I can guarantee you, though people know his name, Zacchaeus is not what they call him. And it's also probably part of the reason why he climbs up in the tree. It's not just because he's got small man syndrome. I mean, the Bible's clear. He's a short dude. But it's probably also because he's not just trying to get a peek above the crowd. He's trying to get a peek from a distance. Because there's got to be something in Zacchaeus' head that says that a person like me, this religious Jesus guy, even if he's not God, he's clearly a religious guy, is not going to want much to do with a person like me, a lying, swindling, backstabbing opportunist like me. And so getting a glance of Jesus from a distance seems like a safe bet for a person like Zacchaeus. But here's what I love about the story. No matter how much you may try to keep God at a distance, either because you think he doesn't want anything to do with you or because you don't want anything to do with him, he will always work to close that gap. And sometimes he will move towards you in an experience and an encounter that may not be anything like you thought it would be. And he will invite you every bit as much as like he did Zacchaeus. I just want to know you. Hey, can I come over? Can I come over to your place? Because so here's the thing. I think we tend to think that there's a couple people that probably get on God's radar. The really good, like moral people that he's thumbing up, like your life. And then over here, it's the other people that get on God's radar that are the opposite of the spectrum. The ones that don't have the good moral life, and they've got the stuff that he's looking at just going, you're on my radar too. You're getting the thumbs up, you're getting smited. And that's what we think. Like those are the two people that get on God's radar. Listen to me. If there's anybody that's going to be on the you're getting smited radar, it would be Zacchaeus, right? And I don't care what you think you've done that might put you more in this category than that. Listen to me. If it's a competition for who's worse between you and Zacchaeus, you lose every time. He's way worse. He's got way more baggage than you. But notice what the first thing is that Jesus does when he comes to him. What is the first thing he says to him? Help me out here. Participate. What? Even before that. Even before we get down here, what does he say? He said his name. Zacchaeus. Now, there is absolutely nothing in this story to indicate that the two of them have ever met. As a matter of fact, there's plenty in the story to indicate they've never met each other. And yet, in the very first moment that Jesus walks up to him, he calls him by name. Zacchaeus. And then he instructs. But the first thing he does is calls him by name. You know, one of the most common things that we see happen time and time again in an encounter with God, be it the first time or the 500th time, is that he calls people by name. Saul, why are you persecuting me? Samuel, wake up. Peter, follow me. Zacchaeus, get down. Moses, take off your sandals. You are on holy ground. Yeah, have you guys had any time recently where you've had to fill out a name tag, wear a name tag? I just did this last week. I was at an event, a couple hundred people. We all had to do the name tag thing. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, my name is. Like, here's what's so funny about those moments. We hate that. I don't know about you. I hate that. Most people I know, they're like, ugh. Like, there's like this moment of begrudging, like, I've got to wear a name tag. So I always do I put it down here on my leg. It's kind of, I don't know why I do that. It's just, I hate wearing a name tag. But here's the ironic twist to that, is that all of us want to be known. As much as sometimes we don't want to be on the spot, we all want to be known. And knowing someone's name, it is the beginning of knowing them. It's the beginning of being known. Your name and who you are intertwined. Part of your identity and your name just mixed together in such a way that to know someone's name is the beginning of both being known and knowing someone. It's why we even put so much energy and effort into how we name our kids. Like my son, our firstborn, was kind of an easy one for us. We had always loved the name Tobin. And so when we found out we were having a boy, that was it. But it wasn't just like nobody picks the name for their kid by going, I'm just going to draw some out of a hat. If you did, I'm sorry. But I don't think most of us do. Like, we put thought into it. We put meaning, because the names that we pick for our kids, they're meant to be a reflection of who he is, who she is, how they'll navigate life, like a picture of our hopes and our dreams for them. And so for us, Tobin made sense because Tobin comes from a Hebrew word, tovia. It's on my arm. And it means God is good or God is beautiful. And what I loved about that is Nicole and I, we felt like there just wasn't a better name to give our firstborn son than God is good, because that was just such a tangible sign, a tangible gift of his goodness for us to point to the fact that he would entrust us, this knucklehead, with a little boy to be a dad to. Like, how much gooder, I know it's not a word, stay with me, how much gooder could God be than that he would give me a little boy to be a dad to? So Tobin became that. And then our girls. I don't know if you guys struggled to name your kids. Like, if it was a struggle, be like, I don't know what we pick. Like, if you think it's a struggle to pick one, try picking two, right? You guys know, like, picking two names at one time. Like, I knew that when we found out we were having twin girls, I had always loved the name Corinne. So I'm like, all right, one of them's going to be Corinne. Sold. We got that down. But then Nicole and I could not agree on the other name. For the life of us, every name she picked, I hated. Every name I picked, she hated. I mean, we just could not get along. So true story, one day, we're driving down 75s, going out to the mall, whatever that one is out there. And what? Yeah, whatever, it's a mall. So we're going to the mall, and we pass this road. We're like in the heat of the moment. Like, I hate that name, I hate that name, I hate that name. And we pass Joslyn Road. And I go, you know what, just forget it. Call her Joslyn. And Nicole goes, I kind of like that. I was like, you know what? I kind of like that too. Joslyn it is. So we looked into both Corinne and Joslyn. And here's what Corinne means. Morning sunshine. And then we gave them both of our names as well. So Corinne is Corinne Nicole, And Joslyn is Joslyn Brook. We figured Joslyn Craig would sound weird, but Craig means crag. Crag is a creek, so Brook is a feminine version of creek, Joslyn Brook. So Corinne Nicole, Joslyn Brook. Corinne Nicole, it means morning sunshine and victor of the people. And that little girl, she is just a ball of light. I mean, she just wakes up ready to conquer the world, and she is an aggressive go-getter. She is the victor of the people. She will probably accomplish more than anyone else in our family. And then Joslyn Brook. Joslyn means happy. And Brooke, it refers to somebody who kind of carves their own path in life. And Joslyn, if you know my little Joslyn, she is, some days we think she's in the wrong family because she's just the sweetest little child. She's just got the most tender heart, and all the rest of us are like, man, we need more of that. And she also is just doing her own thing. She doesn't care. She's just doing her own thing in life, and she's just off in her own little head. And just, like, I'm just saying there's something powerful about a name. Which is why I agree with what I read from one author recently who said, when you know a person's name, it means that their very existence has suddenly landed on your radar. One of the reasons that I think just possibly there are so many examples in the Bible of God coming to people and knowing their name is because he wants you to know he knows your name. Like, I don't know if that matters to you right now. Maybe it's like, oh, God knows I would expect he's God. He probably knows everything. No, listen to me. Listen. He knows your name means you matter to him, means he knows you. Maybe one of the reasons that God wants us to realize that he knows our name is so that you would know that among the billions of people that exist, you are not just a face in the crowd. You are not just a lost voice in creation, that he knows everything about you. He knows your name. He knows the hairs on your head. He knows your fears, your dreams, your hurts, your hopes, all of it. Like, he deeply, passionately knows you. You know what? He doesn't even just know you. He doesn't even just love you. Do you realize that God likes you? I guess a whole other thing, isn't it? Because there's plenty of people that are in my life that I love that I don't necessarily like. Hello, family. Like, there's just people that you all have to love. And you do. You're like, oh, I love them. I don't like them. And there's people that probably feel that about me. I love that guy. I don't like him. That's just, there are those people. God likes you. He loves you. He adores you. And he likes you. Maybe one of the reasons that so many moments of encounter with God involve a name at the start is for you to know he knows your name. Because you're not just lost in the crowd. Maybe for you to even know that whatever the identity is that you have developed with the rest of the world, maybe one that you didn't want, or maybe one that you have tried to create as a persona to hide yourself from the world. Listen to me. He sees through that. And he knows the real, unfiltered you, and he loves you no less. Maybe one of the reasons there are so many stories of people being called by name is so that you would know that even if he's not on your radar, you are on his. Do you remember, some of you aren't going to remember this, probably half of you. You remember the old TV show Cheers? Actually, I'm going to do this. Hands. How many remember Cheers? That's what I thought. Some of you are like, what? Huh? Cheers is an old show. It was about a group of people. The relationships are formed basically after work in a bar. And there was a theme song that became like the iconic cry of that whole TV show. It went like this. Sometimes you just want to go where, help me out, and where everybody knows your name. Because that puts you on a radar. So I went on YouTube recently and I looked up the song because I hadn't heard it in a while. And I thought maybe we'll play a clip of it today, which we're not gonna, but I listened to it for a minute. And then I did what you should never do because it's a black hole. I started reading the comments. And one of the comments at the top was a guy that says, I go to the bar every Friday and none of them drunks still know my name. Sad face. What follows is the wisdom of YouTube. One comment in response says, you just need to go there until they're all a little bit more drunk. That's when people get to really know each other. Another guy says, yeah, if you don't go there every day, you just won't get recognized. You got to go there until you become a part of some of their jokes. That means they know you. Another one says, hey, look at it this way. At least if you go there every day, you're a good customer. Another one says, how often do you really go? I wonder if the bartender even knows your drink by name. If he doesn't know your drink, you're not really known there yet. Someone else says, then you must be doing something wrong, bruh. Do you talk enough? Another one says, here's a solution. You got to reach the same level of drunkenness. That's what worked for me. Once you're as drunk as them, then you get brought in. Then somebody says, some people spend their whole lives in a bar. Just yesterday, I sat next to a guy for 11 hours. He never asked me my name. I didn't care. And then my favorite, last one. Hey, man, everybody remembers everybody's name in Ireland. A brewery could be drank dry on happy hour. We could row and fight while drinking. After the last call, we'd never even hold a grudge. We'd meet there the next day, shake hands, buy each other a pint, and the night before, forgotten all about. So clearly we all need to move to Ireland if we feel like we have no friends, right? But what do you do? Like, there's the wisdom of the world. If you want friends, get a little drunker. If you want friends, then you gotta become the joke that everybody tells. Like, what do we do? Because there is this longing, even within the most introverted of us, to be known. Even if we don't want to be known by everybody, there is a longing in all of us to be known, and not just to be known, to be enjoyed, to be liked, to be loved. And the frustrating rub is that we live in a world that often requires us and tries to convince us to be someone different than we truly feel we are. And if we're unwilling to play by the world's rules, they will label us with a name we don't want. Maybe some of you feel like you've been trying to escape a name that you've been branded with that you don't want. And it's why I think that so many of us so desperately long to be in a relationship where somebody knows us, like the real us, the unfiltered, raw, authentic, true version of who we are, and yet still loves us and cares about us. You know, that's why we say the phrase here so often, come as you are. Because I believe that the absolute only place that happens, where you can be in the safety of a place where you are truly known, is in an ongoing relational encounter with Jesus Christ. Listen, we can try to do that with each other, and sometimes we get it good. And other times we mess it up because we're people. And we just can't always create that environment perfectly, but the one who can is Jesus, who says, I already know you, and I've called you by name. As a matter of fact, I want to give you a couple of quick verses because I want you to see this isn't just how he relates to other people. So look at some of these on your screen, if you will. In the book of Isaiah, this is what we read. But now, O Jacob, listen to the Lord who created you. O Israel, the one who formed you, who says, do not be afraid, for I have ransomed you. I have called you. Say it. I've called you by name. Called you by name. Go to another one. Exodus chapter 33. Then Moses said, if you don't personally go with us, don't make us leave this place. How will anyone know that you look favorably on me and on your people, if you don't go with us? So he's asking, like, be with us. We need your presence. For your presence among us, it sets your people and me apart from all other people on the earth. And the Lord replied to Moses, I will indeed do what you have asked, for I look favorably on you, and I know you by what? By name. Go to Revelation chapter 20. And I saw a great throne, and the one sitting on it. The earth and the sky fled from his presence, but they found no place to hide. I saw the dead, both great and small, standing before God's throne, and the books were opened, including the book of life. And the dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. And the sea gave up its dead, and death and the grave gave up their dead. And all were judged according to their deeds. Then death and the grave were thrown into the lake of fire. This lake of fire is the second death, and anyone whose name was not found recorded in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. Do you realize even your name is put in a place that says, this one is mine? Let me give you one more verse, and this is one of my favorites out of Isaiah. Never can a mother forget her nursing child. Can she feel no love for the child she has born? But even if that were possible, I would not forget you. This is God talking to his people. You got another one? Was that it? See, I have written you, your name, on the palms of my hand. You ever read that verse? Realize that God says when you step into a relationship with him, where does he put your name? Right there. It's not like a cheat sheet. It's not so that one day when he meets you, he can be like, hey, Dennis, right? That's not why I did this. It's not because I thought one day I'd forget his name. Hey, Tobin. It's because that little boy, from the moment I saw him, before I ever saw him, meant so much to me that I was willing to brand my skin with his name. Listen to me, you mean so much to your God that he's willing to brand his skin with your name. And when you step into a relationship with him, that's what he does, because he knows you by name. He calls you by name. Now, here's the only mistake we make with this sometimes, is that we think that that because God says, I want you to come to me as you are, all of you unfiltered, raw. I love you just the way you are. You ain't got to clean nothing up, because he has this Zacchaeus type of relationship with us too, where he goes, listen, I'm not putting you on my radar to smite you. I'm putting you on my radar because I want to know you. But here's a mistake we make, is we think sometimes that means that he then goes, so just keep being who you're being, doing what you're doing. It's all good. Like, that'd be really weird if the story of Zacchaeus ended right here. Like God just showed up, hung out with Zacchaeus, and was like, I just heard you throw the best parties, man. I wanted to come over and see what was up. You know, keep it saucy, Zacchaeus. Don't forget to tithe. Like, that'd be weird if that's how he left the whole thing. But it's not. Go back to Luke really quick, and this is how it wraps up. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, which he had, I will pay back 4 times the amount. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Listen to me. The reason God knows your name is because he knows you, and the reason he knows you is because he adores you. And when he says, come to me as you are, is not to leave you that way. It's because he has so much more in store. Next week, what we're going to look at is the second thing that often happens when we meet God and have an encounter with him. The first is he calls you by name. The second is he begins to speak to you about what you were made for. But it all begins with your name. One of my favorite movies, we're going to end with this real quick clip that I want you to see, is a movie by Heath Ledger. If you remember Heath Ledger, he did a movie a while ago called A Knight's Tale. And it was a bit of a weird movie, but it just became one of my favorites. And it became one of my favorites because of the theme in the movie about identity and name. So the whole movie, I'll sum it up really quick for you. The whole movie opens up with Ledger being a squire to a knight, and the knight is basically like that era's, the way they set it up is like that era's like superstar athlete. And they're in a jousting tournament, and so the squire serves the knight, and that's how he kind of makes his living. And in that era, if you're not born into nobility, you're nothing. Your name even, you have a name that means nothing. You have a name that means less than. So that's who he is, William Thatcher. That's his name as a squire. Well, in one of the jousting scenes that first opens the movie, the knight that he serves dies. And so in a minute in between the jousting event, he and the other squires realize they got 2 options. One is to go tell everybody, and then they forfeit. Now all of them are they're out of a job and out of luck. Or one of them suits up in the armor so that nobody knows who they are and go joust in the stead of the knight they served and see if they can win that one, call it a day, get their money, and then go their separate ways. Well, he wins. So William Thatcher puts on the knight's uniform. He wins. They win money. And then he thinks, I can do this. Like, we can fake this. We can fake that we're knights and that I'm a knight. You'll be my squires. And so the whole movie goes through this, and he has to develop this new identity. He basically forges his birth documents and patents of nobility, and he becomes this guy named Sir von Liechtenstein is the name that he goes under. It's a real tongue twister, but that's what he goes through for the whole movie. And in every competition, that's his name. That's his name. And you see him almost every time. There's this cringeness that you begin to get throughout the movie because he's living under an identity that's not truly his. And there's this loss in that nobody knows who he really is. And if they knew who he really was, he'd probably be executed because he's faking to be somebody greater than he really is. Until, in one twist in the movie, one of the guys that he's in most competition with finds him out and reports him. Then he's captured, and he's put in the gallows. But a king who he has been jousting with in multiple competitions comes to respect him. Comes to also respect the fact that the people around him love him so much. And comes to him one day and says, you know what, that makes you knightly. How you love people and how they love you. And so the king in this moment knights him. And he does away with this ridiculous von Liechtenstein name. And he says, you are now Sir William Thatcher. And so they go find his dad, who's just an old net weaver, a nobody. But now his dad's a somebody. And he brings his dad to the arena where he's in his last joust, fighting with the supervillain of the movie who ousted him earlier on and tried to get him executed. And they're in one final battle. And only this time he doesn't wear armor. And everybody can see who he is. And just before his last final battle, I love the scene, he shouts his real name and no longer his fake one. Watch this. I love that scene. I remember watching that movie and thinking to myself, even after that hit, I thought, I want to be a knight. And I felt this thought from God. You're mine. You are. I know you by name. There's no hiding your name. Because I've called you by it. I know it because I know you. I don't know if you've ever felt a little like Zacchaeus, like maybe for you, like the only encounter you could have with God would be from a distance. Or maybe you felt like you want an encounter, but maybe you've been looking for all the wrong things. Maybe God has been standing right in front of you trying to give you constant encounters, but you've been looking for the wrong type of encounter. Or maybe for some of you, maybe some of you, you're going, I would like an encounter, but I know I've never had one. Because I've never even wanted one. And maybe for some of you, maybe there's even just something stirring inside you a little bit, where maybe it's not like there's this clear, like, God is here moment even happening now, but just something in you that resonates and goes, if this is true, and if this is who God is, then I do want an encounter with him. Then know this, he wants an encounter with you. He longs for an encounter with you. And all you have to do to have it is begin to step towards him who has already stepped towards you. Can I just give you one simple way to do that? It's just to express that in a prayer. Just to express that in a prayer, that I want that encounter with you, God. Matter of fact, I want to give it to you, because some of you, I know it's 9 o'clock, and you might go, this is the faithful few that come to 9. We're with you in this. Maybe, but maybe some of us are still trying to seek this out and figure out who is God. And I don't know if I want an encounter. Maybe some of you are still in that place, and now you're going, actually, I do. Here's all you do. Would you pray this prayer with me to yourself in the moment where you're at in this seat? Here we go. Dear Jesus Christ, resurrected Lord, I long for an encounter with you. I give you my life, so please begin to give me yours. Amen. And I always love the simplicity of that prayer, because some people challenge me regularly. You got to say more. No, you don't. That's where it all begins. There is more to eventually say, and there's so much more to eventually hear. But the place it begins is acknowledging God wants an encounter with you. And not just a first one. Because some of you are like, I believe. Do you realize he wants to continue to have encounter after encounter after encounter after encounter after encounter with you? Look for them, because they're everywhere. When he tries to meet with you, he does it all over the place in different ways, and often we miss them because we're looking for the wrong thing. So a couple things I need to let you know about before we leave here and walk out, and I appreciate you bearing with us today. One is this: there is no first service next week. We are only doing an 11 o'clock next week because many of our people are away. And so we are strategizing next week to pull us all together. We just thought it would be a phenomenal opportunity with the holiday weekend to introduce 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock and 11 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Because sometimes there are some of you here that don't even know that there are some of you that go to 11 o'clock and 11 o'clock don't know you at 9 o'clock. So we thought, what a perfect weekend to bring us all together and make the introduction of the church that comes here in the same building every weekend. So if you show up at 9 o'clock next week, you are welcome to be here. You may be alone, but you're welcome to be here. You can rehearse with the band. But the service next week will be at 11 o'clock. So if you're a faithful Niner and you're here next week and you're like, I'm not going out of town, great. Join us for 11. Meet some people maybe you haven't yet. The following week, back to business as usual at the 9 o'clock and an 11 o'clock. But for next week, we will be here at 11 o'clock only, so don't mess that up. Lastly, we are only a couple of weeks away from the finish and the conclusion of our White Flag Pledge. The first week of June is it. That is the last week where we close those books, and what we have is what we have. Couple things that you need to know. 4 numbers that are really important for us. 450,000, 400,000. 450,000 was the original pledge amount. We based all of our expenses off of 400,000, realizing that there would just be changes and some people coming, some people going, and as well as some people's just financial situations. We have been desperately trying to say, can we still get to the 450, even though we based a lot of our expenses off of 4, can we get to the 450 and make sure that we can pay back the loans that we took out even quicker and not have that hanging over our heads? So it's exciting to realize we are this close to hitting the 4, which means I think we could hit the 450. And here's how we could do it. For us to hit the 400,000 mark, it just means an additional $25. That's it. Above and beyond what all the families here are already giving for 3 more weeks. Done. We do that, we've hit the 400. $133 per family for the next 3 weeks puts us at the 450. So I'm just, again, as we close in and move into the end of this whole campaign, asking that you would prayerfully consider how it is. And I know that we've all given a lot, and we have sacrificed a lot. And some of us have even given what we said and then given more. And I'm just asking you, can we work together and do everything possible to hit the 400 and even exceed it some? So Paradox Church, would you just stand with me for one moment as I pray for you, bless you out, and let you know that if we can also continue to talk with you, pray for you, or love on you, there will be people up front that will do that. Jesus, be gracious to us as we walk out these doors, be present to us, and be close to us. Would you let us this week, I pray, have an encounter where, if nothing else, we hear you whisper in our ear our own name. In Jesus' name.